Welcome to the Mockingcast, the podcast of Mockingbird Ministries. I'm David Zoll, your host, and in a few moments, I'll be joined by my co-hosts, Sarah Condon and RJ Heyman. We come to you every other week to discuss a few of the places where we currently see grace and its absence playing out in unexpected and compelling ways. We're glad to have you with us.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. God.
I thought we'd start this episode of the Mockingcast doing something we haven't done for a little while, and not hearing about your lives, which, let me guess, RJ misses his children. Sarah went and tried on some clothes.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
I miss my children? That's absolutely incorrect. they're more than welcome to leave.
I want to hear recommendations of the things that the two of you have been listening to, reading, watching, etc., etc. Is there anything that you would want to, or maybe by way of talking about, catching us up on what's going on? But what do you got, Sarah? You got anything you want to push out to the masses?
Plug.
That I want to hawk.
Totally.
Yeah. So actually, I'm having to be really careful about anything I read right now, especially in terms of daily devotionals and stuff. And honestly, things with fewer words are better. So I am currently reading over and over again Spencer Reese, who is he's an Episcopal priest, and I actually went to seminary with him. And he's an incredible poet, an incredible painter, an Episcopal priest, a heart for the least, the last, the lost, the lonely, and a heart for the gospel. He's just an amazing person. But anyway, Spencer has a book out called All the Beauty Still Left, a poet's painted book of hours. And I just cannot recommend enough. It's so beautiful. So he
just sort of does watercolors, right? Beautiful,
and
beautiful
it's
things.
not even his words, which is really kind of amazing.
Really?
It's words from other people. I mean, and he's a poet. It's just fabulous. So I cannot recommend that enough. And the other thing that I wanted to recommend is I'm very into snail repair eye cream right now.
You are.
So, and
Your
it's
eyes
actual.
look amazing, I have to
Thank
say.
You.
You look 10 years younger. It's incredible.
I don't.
What does that mean? Are you repairing the snails, or the snails repairing you?
No, the snails repair you. So they put snails on a mesh, and you know how snails excrete goo?
Oh yeah, I'm aware of that. Yeah.
They turn that into eye lotion, and you put it on your face.
Wow.
So
Incredible.
10 out of 10. Book of Hours, snail anti-aging cream. These are my go-tos right now.
There you go.
RJ?
I know which one I'm going to try first. Spencer is, by the way, there's a documentary about this orphanage in Bolivia, I believe it is, our little our Lady of the Roses or something like that, that our church works with, that he was very instrumental in helping. And it's an incredible documentary.
It's an orphanage for little girls.
Yeah, you're right, isn't it? It's amazing. Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's where I first heard his name, and then I came across his poetry, and then all of a sudden his Instagram. This man is a little bit too talented to exist, but at least it's for the sake of the Lord.
Yeah, I'm going to ignore him. He's making me jealous already. I don't need help feeling more insecure than I already do. So.
RJ's ordering the snail cream. Okay, okay.
Right. Well, I have not consumed much media lately, to be told. It sounds weird. I know. I'm sorry. It's true.
Okay.
I'm trying to think of the last thing I saw that was I hadn't seen before, that I was like, wow, that was really amazing. Life is just a little too crazy right now, and my 4-year-old is won't actually let me sit and watch anything while he's awake, and he never goes to sleep. So I guess I get little pieces of the NBA playoffs. So I can highly recommend Nikola Jokic, who, if you haven't watched him, Denver Nuggets is incredible. I have been grilling meat, so I will also recommend the reverse sear method and the use of a large cast iron skillet. So that's been good. But no, it sounds weird to say, but the latest season of Serial was okay, but kind of boring. I listened to that in my car. Also, my commute's not as long as it used to be, and I also am taking my son to school, and he's just yakking away in my ear the entire time. So there you have it. I have nothing to recommend.
I don't think so. I don't
Except-
think so.
Don't have any more children. That's my recommendation.
That's our recommendation.
You could take that one to the bank, ladies and
You
gentlemen.
can.
I have plenty of recommendations. I'm never at a loss for this. It's a bit of a liability, in fact. Right before we got on, I read a new profile in the New York Times of Sinead O'Connor about her
Yes,
new.
I saw that. Was she smoking the cigarette? That's unbelievable.
Yeah, with
Yes.
her like hand tattoo that says Lumen Christi on it, and
Yes.
she's wearing a hijab, and she's just about the most
I got
original.
through 3 paragraphs before my 4-year-old bugged me, but I'll bet it was incredible.
Well, it's come out. Remember when she ripped up the picture of John Paul
Yes.
Yes.
the second,
The Pope.
the Pope, and she did that 10 years before Spotlight and all that stuff, and like she's been completely vindicated in every
Yes.
conceivable way,
Yes.
and but not only that, she tells a story about Prince in there. I guess she's got a memoir coming out, and there's very few people in the world that are as interesting as Sinead O'Connor. I just want to
It's
throw
so true.
that
She
out there.
converted to
She is-
Islam. I didn't realize she was Muslim now.
she's. I mean, I don't know if the journey's
She
at an
was
end.
a priest for a hot second,
Yeah,
right?
a Catholic
she
priest.
was.
The
Yeah,
Catholic
yeah,
priest.
yeah.
It was a bold move.
She's
Yeah.
been around the block
Yeah,
and then
me
some.
too, girl.
The other thing is, there's a new album out by artist named Natalie Bergman called Mercy.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's sort of like I don't even know how to describe it. Sort of indie gospel, some Portland vibes, but
Yeah.
just beautiful, sincere,
Yeah.
but super artsy music. And there's like a childlikeness to it, but also I don't know. It's kind of there's like a sexuality to it as well. But it's awesome. Mercy. It's rare that you get these records that are about God that also don't suck, and this is one of them. So like people
Praise
should listen to
God.
that. And then last night I was told that the new movie Together with Ed Helms about a man who gets like 40 something and wants a child and hires like a surrogate to do it. I've been told it was amazing. Like my wife
Awesome.
just was in
Really?
tears last night. Says everyone should watch it. So I really am only willing to recommend things that she says without having seen them myself, because she tends to be right about that stuff. So
Yeah.
3
Cool.
recommendations.
Well, and Dave, I have to say, I feel like I've bagged a little too much. Obviously, I love my little 4-year-old, and life wouldn't be the same without him. And today is on the theme of children. Today is my oldest son's 19th birthday, which is nuts. Which means he is now the age that I was when I met Jamie, my wife, which is just kind of a crazy thing to think about, So
That is
it
crazy,
feels
RJ.
like he's we got an adult in the house. And,
I can remember exactly
kind of a
where I
crazy
was
thing.
19 years ago, but
Yeah.
that's just a fluke. That's I also remember babysitting for that kid when he could barely speak, and
Oh.
he had this
I
little
know.
scratchy voice, and now he's
Oh my gosh, little husky voice. Yes.
how would you just? I mean, Jackson is a he's just a enormous human being, like just he's a large man.
He is. He is.
Well, we're going to jump
Anyway.
into. We got quite a few things to talk about today, and the first one is something that all of us know well. It's Charlie Tyson wrote about this in The Atlantic, asking, "Why are we so spiteful?" It's a review of a new book by Simon McCarthy Jones called "Spite: The Upside of Your Dark Side." And I'm less interested in what he says about the book, which he doesn't really like that much, than what he says about spite. He begins, he says, "The purest eruption of spite I've ever witnessed took place at a former friend's birthday party some years ago. We were all in our early 20s, and alcohol had been flowing freely. I slipped into the kitchen to refill my drink. When I returned, the birthday girl, her cheeks flushed from the wine, had become incensed at her boyfriend for some unaccountable transgression. On the coffee table was an enormous cake brought by her now disgraced beloved. The birthday girl seized the platter and with a terrific crash hurled the cake to the floor. 'Now none of us can have any,' she seethed, raising an accusatory frosting-covered finger as guests began edging toward the door." He goes on to say, "Spite defies logic. We act spitefully, lashing out to harm someone else, even at a cost to ourselves, when the desire to punish overrides other considerations. People in the throes of spite's poisonous pleasures do not care if they injure themselves or make the world worse off, so long as they satisfy their rancor. Yet because spite involves a self-inflicted cost, this petty and ultimately antisocial emotion bears a family resemblance to altruism. Many spiteful actors believe they are behaving nobly, meting out justice where it is due. And spite is a symptom of social breakdown, but it is not a trustworthy guide to fair action. This ugly feeling is self-multiplying. It tends to lead not toward justice, but toward more spite. Our judgments about who needs to be, quote, put in their place are frequently defective. A spiteful politics is one in which the immiserated majority fights for scraps while the rich carry on as usual. But we cannot punish our way to a less punitive society.
I love this.
Sarah's eyes while I was reading it, like, what?
I just... the first thing that came to mind is that beautiful scene, it's been a minute since I watched it, in Ted Lasso, where something bad happens to someone. Like, someone gets course corrected who's been very difficult. And Ted Lasso is like with his like group of, guys he coaches with, and they start
the Diamond Dogs.
Yeah, and they start to be gleeful. Do you remember this? And he goes, "Oh no, we're not doing that."
Yes, I do remember that scene.
It's such a brilliant moment of like, the first thought I had was like, what if leadership looked like that? You know what I mean? Because so often, like, the leader in the room is the one that like kind of cues everyone to be like spiteful, right? To be, and it just was like such a beautiful, like, I was like, I have to remember, just the like infusion of grace, just the paint bucket of grace that gets thrown into the spite that's welling up in the room and just covers it. Like, nope, we're not doing that. I just love it. But the other thing that comes to mind, and I actually said this to a friend this morning, and I think it probably once a week, is we all work so hard to, we all want justice, and we usually come into that conversation with a fairly self-righteous spirit. And, it's just a hop, skip, and a jump to punishment and spitefulness towards people. And we always, always, always forget, and I always have to remind myself, people are inevitably their own punishments. And when we try to like institute, what we think is the correctiveness that they need, and usually we have not taken enough time to really think about what that is, and usually we're working out of our own deep woundedness and spitefulness. We make horrible decisions, and we keep God's kingdom really far away. So I think that's a thing. Whenever there's someone in your life, and whenever there's someone in my life that I feel like spiteful feelings towards, and first of all, like, clearly there's some woundedness in both of us, but also like people, I see this over and over again in life. People are their own punishments, right?
Yes. 100%.
Like, it's crazy.
If they're allowed to be, if they're kind of allowed to be, because, if you can, well, they will be no matter what, but the
They
less
will
you
be no matter what.
The
They
less
may
you can
not-
give them something to blame or something to be angry at, or just kind of, which they probably will anyway, if you can surround them with a sort of a cocoon of love in which they can work out their own anger or whatever.
Yeah. Because often our spitefulness towards people is like slows down the process of them like figuring out how much they've
Bottoming
screwed up.
out.
Do you know what I mean? Yeah. No, you're totally. Yeah, and then, even like people we see, it's fascinating who, we feel like, oh, like we should correct something that they've done professionally, and like, why are they so, like, how come they have been corrected professionally? And then like you find out that their personal lives are just a nightmare. And it's like, oh, you know what I mean? Like, it works itself out one way or the other. I don't know.
No.
Spite's such a losing game.
It is. It made me think of the NBA, professional basketball.
Okay.
Made me think of Stephen Curry, who's like the greatest shooter of all time, Golden State Warrior, multiple MVP winner.
I know who he is.
Do you know who that is?
I do. Yeah.
Wow.
No,
okay, I picked the right person.
Yes.
Me on the other hand. Just kidding.
That's right.
I know who he is, yeah.
He went to Davidson. There was a time in his career when he was clearly like the best player in the game. He'd won one MVP and was on his way to winning another MVP. But I think he was still in his rookie contract, and so he wasn't making he was like the fourth highest paid player on his own team. So here
wow.
he is, clearly the best player on his team, maybe probably the best player in the NBA, and he's like the third or fourth best player on his team, and people were amazed that he wasn't actually angrier or they didn't like hold out, because a lot of the time when that happens with athletes, they'll say, I'm not playing until we restart. I'm just going to stop. I'm just going to sit. I'm going to stop playing. I don't care how much it hurts the team, how much it hurts the city, how much I'm out of spite because I'm not making what I deserve. And he didn't do that. And someone asked him, like, how does this not bother you? And he had the real blessing that his father was an NBA player too, although not as good as his son. And he said, my father once said, don't ever waste your time counting another man's money.
Ooh.
And it was like, there you go.
That's a great one. Wow.
That's a good word.
It's such a good word, because he was making like $3 or $4 million a year. He wasn't
Sure.
making $20 or $30 million a year. But how much of our spite is because we don't, because we're so consumed that someone might have a little bit more than we do, and think if I just had what they did, then I'd be happy, which of course is not true. They're just as miserable as you are, maybe 100%. In different ways. But just to be grateful and thankful for what you do have, rather than spiteful that someone else has more than you do.
That's. It reminds me a little bit of the Last Dance stuff about Scottie Pippen, RJ, who is,
totally,
he wasn't making enough money. He did sort of pull the card.
He did.
And
he did. Yeah.
But the other touch point for me is always Seinfeld, where Jerry Seinfeld, he's buying a sports coat, and the clerk starts flirting with Elaine in front of him. He said, how do they that we're not together? And he buys this coat, and he's so mad at this guy that he decides to return it. And they ask him, why are you returning? He says, spite. He said, sorry, sir, you cannot return a jacket out of spite. He's like, well, then I just don't like it then. He's like, no, you've already said spite. That's not a legitimate reason. I always think that's so funny. Well, one other recommendation I'll actually give is because in Tyler, Todd Brewer gave a talk all about anger. About if Jesus had a Twitter account. And, there's always the chestnut that is trotted out about, Jesus had a whip and three, and drove the money changers out of the temple. So it's good for you to be angry and all this stuff. And Todd just took the Greek and completely dressed it down and said, well, that's really not... let me show you what it
real
actually
biblical.
says.
See, I go fake biblical.
Oh my gosh,
That's
I cannot wait
biblical.
to listen.
It's incredible. I mean, he in his very sophisticated and interesting way, and it's super accessible. He basically makes an argument for that there is no New Testament grounds for sort of endorsing anger and it's that's really hard for us to hear in a time when people think
I don't like it.
Yeah, I really love my anger. I'm in love with my
George is angry.
I don't know who I would be. George is getting upset. George likes his chicken spicy. So spite, though, is a good way, because I think people can often say that anger is good, but spite, that's terrible, clearly.
Right.
But how different
they're
actually
so
are
different.
They? Let's move on to The New Yorker, a subject we've talked about quite a few times, but this is a fresh take, a couple fresh takes. This is from Jill Lepore about burnout, modern affliction, or human condition. And she starts out by saying that one Swiss psychotherapist, in a history of burnout published in 2013, said that burnout is increasingly serious and of widespread concern, so much so that he found it in the Old Testament. Moses was burnt out in Numbers 11:14 when he complained to God, I am not able to bear all this people alone because it is too heavy for me. And so was Elijah in 1 Kings 19 when he, quote, went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a juniper tree, and he requested for himself that he might die and said, it is enough. I'd never really heard the Old Testament invoked as an example for burnout.
I haven't either.
She goes on to write, to be burned out is to be used up, like a battery so depleted it can't be recharged.
I keep thinking about the woman at the well, too. I just feel like she was like, I don't care. You know what I mean?
I'm done.
I'm done. Who are you?
I just need some water. Get out of my way.
Where's the manager? Okay, sorry. Keep going.
In people, unlike batteries, burnout is said to produce the defining symptoms of burnout syndrome, which are exhaustion, cynicism, and loss of efficacy. Around the world, 3 out of 5 workers say they're burned out. But what exactly is burnout? Well, to question burnout, because that's what this is basically saying, if everyone says they're burned out, what is it, is burnout just meaningless? To question burnout isn't to deny the scale of suffering or the many ravages of the COVID pandemic: despair, bitterness, fatigue, boredom, loneliness, alienation, and grief, especially grief. To question burnout is to wonder what meanings so baggy an idea can possibly hold, and whether it can really help anyone shoulder hardship. Burnout is a metaphor disguised as a diagnosis. If everyone is burned out and always has been, well, then maybe burnout is just the hell of life. And then she goes on to quote, she says, every age has its signature afflictions. The Korean-born Berlin-based philosopher Byung-Chul Han writes in the Burnout Society. Burnout for Han is depression and exhaustion, the, quote, sickness of a society that suffers from excessive positivity. An achievement society, a yes-we-can world in which nothing is impossible, a world that requires people to strive to the point of self-destruction. Han writes, burnout reflects a humanity waging war on itself. And then the louder the talk about burnout, it appears, the greater number of people who say they're burned out, harried, depleted, and disconsolate. What can explain the astonishing rise and spread of this affliction? Here's where I did not expect her to go. Declining church membership comes to mind. In 1985, 71% of Americans belonged to a house of worship, which is about what that percentage had been since the 1940s. In 2020, only 47% of Americans belong to an institution of faith. Many of the recommended ways to address burnout, wellness, mindfulness, and meditation, are secularized versions of prayer, Sabbath keeping, and worship. If burnout has been around since the Trojan War, prayer, worship, and the Sabbath are what humans invented to alleviate it. But then she wisely says, actually praying, honoring the Sabbath, and attending worship services don't seem to prevent people who are religious from burning out, since religious websites and magazines are full of warnings about burnout, including for the clergy. But today, you can suffer from marriage burnout and parent burnout and pandemic burnout, partly because although burnout is supposed to be mainly about working too much, people now talk about all sorts of things that aren't work as if they were. You have to work on your marriage, work in your garden, work out, work harder on raising your kids, work on your relationship with God. Even getting a massage is, quote, body work. All right, burnout. There's another article about it I want to touch on, but what do you think? Is it too loose of a term to have any meaning, or is it simply, is it more acute now than it's ever been? Do you feel burned out? I certainly have heard from tens of clergy who feel this way.
I mean, I always feel burned out this time of year, and, clearly it's been a year. I don't know. It's funny. I keep thinking about this conversation I had with our 10-year-old this week where we were talking about like all of the responsibilities he has and sort of the swirling world around him. And I mean, I know it's naive. I come from an agrarian family, but I was also like, do you know what you'd be doing 100 years ago, son? And he was like, no. And I was like, well, you'd probably be helping your daddy to farm, and you might learn to read. Mm-hmm. And that, you know what I mean? Like, that's what you'd be doing as a 10-year-old. And it's just, life does feel so much faster and harder, even for kids, especially for kids, but for all of us, I mean, he lives in a world now where his grandparents can die in a car accident. Like, it's just, but I mean, I say that, and at the same time, I've managed to live in this world, right, for almost 40 years. And at least in my country, I've never experienced war. I mean, I don't know, I mean, there's a lot that we aren't having to deal with. It's just, I know it sounds bleak, but I kind of love the biblical stuff. I'd never thought about it that way. I love that this is just maybe the human condition.
Life is just too much.
Life is just too much.
Yeah. Is too much. I was reflecting on whether I feel burned out or not, because sometimes my lovely parishioners are like, RJ, we're worried about you burning out because it's been a crazy year and a half, and I started a new job, a pandemic, and I think I've had one Sunday off since January 2020.
What?
Yeah.
RJ!
Yeah. So I'm tired.
They're right to be a little worried. Sorry.
I know.
RJ,
I know.
this is like, now we're in a meeting about you.
This is about me, yeah.
You're burned out when you don't know if you're burned out because you don't have time to think about it.
Here's what I want to say. I'm tired. I'm definitely tired. Mm-hmm. I don't think I'm burned out because I'm hopeful. and I mean, and I like what I like what I am doing, and it feels like, if things were going badly, I would be very burned out.
Sure.
I think.
Yeah.
But because things are going well, I'm not. And of course, that's all a little bit, perception versus reality. But yeah, so maybe it's just a function of how you feel, a combination of how hard you're working and how you feel about what you're doing, how hopeful you are about the future or the relationships that you formed, or I remember talking with my brother, who, I'm the only one who's like in full-time Christian work, and the rest of my brothers are in kind of, quote unquote secular work. But he did say sometimes when you're in secular work, you get to a point in your job where you feel like anyone could do this. Like why this is meaningless. Like they could, he said, I feel like you could train a monkey. This was more in his 20s. He said, I feel like you could train a monkey to do what I'm doing in about 2 weeks. So there was no sense of meaning or uniqueness about what he was doing, which is the benefit of being in something like, a caring industry.
And a helper profession, for sure.
A helper profession.
Yeah.
It's interesting what you said about church. It reminds me of what Tim Kreider said when he gave his talk at Mockingbird about who's an atheist. But he said, it's been about 140 years since Nietzsche declared that God was dead, and things haven't been going so well since then. Like, I'm not sure that was such a good idea. And Tim Kreider said that as an atheist. So it is interesting, the less, the farther away we get from this idea that people are intrinsically beloved and valuable apart from anything they accomplish or produce, the more depressed and anxious and burned out they get. And because, yes, life is hard, but being loved in the middle of its difficulty makes it a little more bearable. And maybe that's what it is too, is like, I really do love my people and I feel like they love me. And that makes the work more fun.
But RJ, what you just said is so insightful. Like, the further we get away from belovedness,
Yeah.
like the more burned out we are, because the more we're like hustling to do it, on our own. It's just, it's that whole thing we talked about with Lent, where it's like, we think we're like running towards Easter, but Easter's coming towards us. It's just like, ugh.
Yeah, I think it's true. One of the assumptions behind her article is this idea that if everyone feels burnt out, well, then it's not a thing, or it's like it's just a condition. It's just what life is like. And I think everyone can feel a certain way and it still be a problem. It can or it's not any less of an affliction.
Right.
And yes, I'm of the opinion that I do think some digital technologies and smartphones and things have made the pace a little crazier, and they've also enabled people who don't want to deal with whatever's going on inside them, given them a very easy means to avoid any of that, and therefore continue burnout. And I was grateful she sort of recognized that some of the sitting still aspect of church life, of prayer, of taking stock, of taking the pulse, these are, they're not just luxuries. These are actual things that people need, and they need them in the same way they need what they're getting from their work. But there's another article this week in The Cut that Katie Heaney wrote called "The Clock Out Cure," saying how like quitting your job has become like a new way of dealing with burnout, but that it's like a status thing almost. She says, today, boldly ditching your job is seen as a radical form of self-care. It's not only healthy, but brave, even aspirational. But then she says, and I think this is an uncomfortably close to the bone, true statement. She says, burnout is an attractive diagnosis for the self-aggrandizing. It suggests that one's job is uniquely draining, almost to the point of a medical emergency. It's also a predominantly white-collar condition.
Is she the child of an Episcopal priest?
For those who can afford to quit, claiming burnout may be an effective way to signal one's essential employability, a way to reassure your future bosses that you will work yourself to the bone for them right after this break. I thought that is, it's one of the reasons why burnout has caught on so much is because it's flattering. It's I'm burnt out because I work that hard and I'm that important and no one can live without me. And, I'm good at my job. And maybe people who are genuinely burnt out, and I think that's a lot of us, and you can also be using it for your own self-aggrandizement while still suffering the very real
bonus.
things. What?
Bonus.
Bonus.
Like,
it serves a bunch of different purposes, and I think it's true. So
it's weird to say. Like I'm like thinking through this as I'm saying it. So who knows what's gonna come out of my mouth? But I am thinking about how when mom and dad died, there were people around me that were like, "Well, you're gonna quit your job, right? Like this is too much for you to do all this and to like have a ministry." And I was so thankful for the ministry because it kind of pulled me out of my own deep, deep sadness, and gave me a sense of purpose and a sense of hope. And I do wonder if part of that is because like my ministry is so intrinsically connected to the gospel. Do you know what I mean? Like even when I felt really hopeless, I could almost like in my ministry like impute like hope, like, or my students would like impute hopefulness to me. Like I remember being with them, this is pretty recently, we went on a retreat and, my parents got brought up a lot. And I finally looked at one of my students and I said, I'm really sorry that like, I'm like the sad chaplain. And she said, we just feel so lucky to get to spend time with you. And it was like, yeah, I mean, I kind of look at that situation and I'm like thankful actually that I didn't impulsively just be like, I can't handle anything. You know what I mean? Because it's been such a gift. But yeah, I mean, that's a power move though, for sure. To just be like, I don't even like, I'm so burned out. I gotta, take a break and plant succulents and make face masks. Or
have a nervous
whatever.
breakdown and go to France for 3 months.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things she
Rockefeller-style.
says.
That sounds like miserable to me, though. Does it not sound miserable? I don't know. Like maybe I just like work a lot. I don't know.
Just going to
like
sit in like an
I guess you're
estate?
never taking a sabbatical.
like God, just me and my own thoughts. No.
I think it depends whether you see your job as a job or as like a calling / career.
For sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, because
and that's a privilege.
I'm definitely on the latter end of the spectrum, but I've worked with people who their job is a job, and like at 5 o'clock in 1 second, they're gone. They're clearing off their desk at 5 minutes to 5, looking at it. And part of you is like, gosh, where's the work ethic? Aren't you going to work a little bit over 5? And part of you is like, I don't think those people are getting burned out.
Yeah.
Right,
they're showing up, they're working their hours, and they got better things to do.
I mean,
and they're not, and they certainly don't have any presense to like that like I do, that what I'm doing is the most important thing in the world.
It's you're not that special. It's
exactly
I do think it's perceptive though to take it to a religious place, because what do we been talk what does legalism do in the Christian life? It's like God will love you when you've sort of proven your worth or your piety or your devotion or your goodness. Like that's that secularized version of that is what's driving a lot of this burnout, and this is the sort of thing that basically we've been trying to address with the work of Mockingbird for years, is to turn what if God was not so much a boss who was wagging his finger, as a loving father or a loving parent, or however you want to think about it, and that I just am grateful that she made the religious connection, because
It's amazing.
we see what they call Christian burnouts are essentially deconverted people, or they say this Protestantism is just too hard. Me and God, I can't do it. I want to just be told. I just want the priest to just tell me what's going on, and it's fine. Because there's a bit of a burnout that's happening in that regard.
Yeah.
I just can't keep it up anymore. How often have we heard that? I just couldn't keep it up. Whether that's a facade of goodness, whether that's like a treadmill of good works. I just couldn't keep it up anymore. I needed a break. And now during the pandemic, you do hear from a lot of people, it's like, it's been kind of a nice break from church. Now I miss it.
Yeah.
But the human psyche, even in a church that's preaching grace, even in a context where you're hearing about love and forgiveness, you still are going to turn things into taskmasters that aren't necessarily meant that way.
And it's funny, like, as we're thinking about coming back to, as people are coming back to church, like, I saw a sermon recently a friend shared with me. And this, this preacher was just like, it's been really nice that we've all been able to be online, and it's really good for our elderly people that can't make it to worship. But this church needs to be more full. And that's how this person started their sermon. And I was just like, hey, boo-boo, that's not going to work. Ain't nobody coming next Sunday because you said that,
We cannot punish our way to a more punitive, less punitive society.
And it's also like, what anxiety are you dealing with? Like, it was just so, like, stark. And I think as our people come back to church, just if you could just maybe believe for yourself before you get in a pulpit that you are beloved to God, and then speak that to them.
It is finished.
Yeah. I mean, anyway,
do we view church as a break from life or something that we need to take a break from? And those are two very different ways to experience it, And
it's so
well,
true.
and how people feel about it is going to depend a lot on what they're hearing from up front.
It's true.
Like the kind of message they're getting. Dave, you talking about I can't do it anymore. It reminded me when I first started working for Focus, a youth ministry. And for about a year and a half when I first started that job, I was trying so hard to kind of be what I thought these middle schoolers and high schoolers wanted me to be kind of like the cool youth leader. And it was kind of working. And then we had our first baby.
Then
and
they
I was
got to know you.
exhausted, and then they got to know me. It all fell apart. But I remember there being a certain point where I was like, I can't pretend anymore. Like, I'm just going to have to be myself. And that's either going to have to be enough or not. And it was enough, and it was actually better, and it was so much more fun. So much more fun, just to be my snarky, lame self.
Speaking of fun, I thought there was a great little article in The Onion that kind of mirrored some of this about, here in the East Coast, we're bracing ourselves for the invasion of cicadas, that happens every 17 years. The Onion reported sort of, in response to the brood's reemergence after lying dormant since 2004, several area insects reportedly said, wow, we hope you had a nice 17 years off, to a group of periodical cicadas Tuesday, expressing annoyance over being forced during the prolonged absence to torment humans on their own. You certainly look refreshed. That was some break, huh? A local mosquito told some gathered cicadas. I thought that was clever.
That's funny.
Vice.com just reported that chaplains are in high demand in increasingly secular America, and I think this has to do with burnout. Sarah, you're a chaplain. You've been a chaplain.
So are you, Dave?
I guess I am a chaplain. Yeah. That's
you are
right.
a chaplain, Dave.
The demand for spiritual care in 2021 this is Diana Kreutzmann writing, may seem surprising. Religious belief is in decline across the U.S., and clinical therapy is becoming more widely available and increasingly destigmatized. But in secular institutions around the country, from the New York Metropolitan Transit System to universities, labor unions, and government bodies, chaplains have maintained a constant presence and in some cases even expanded their ministry, focusing on the intersection of spiritual and mental health. The needs of employees, companies are coming to realize, are much more holistic than vacation time and leave policies, said Michael Skaggs, Director of Programs for Brandeis University's Chaplaincy Innovation Lab. Employees don't leave their spiritual and religious needs at the door. She goes on to write, the roots of chaplaincy are undeniably Christian and Protestant, according to Winifred Sullivan, author of A Ministry of Presence. And the intertwining of the chaplaincy with government service go back to the founding of the country. Christian chaplains served in the military during the Revolutionary War, while in the early 19th century, Protestant reformers who wanted to replace corporal punishment with rehabilitation became the first prison chaplains. More recently, private companies have found chaplains provide workers with an important outlet. The decline of churches in America makes accessing services harder for those who still want to, placing more of the burden on spiritual counseling on chaplains in secular institutions. David Miller, a Princeton professor who studies faith and work, wrote that chaplaincies can create lower turnover rates, increased levels of focus, and reduction in stress-related illnesses. We live in a time of existential crisis as a result of both environmental changes and political and technological changes, says Winifred Sullivan. And the phenomenon of the proliferation of chaplains is partly a response to pain and to suffering on a huge scale. Another humanities professor at NYU who studies chaplains says that participation in religious communities is going to go down further because of the demographics. But younger people, including our students, are showing great interest in something, meaning, purpose, spirituality. We call it different things. So if you're a young seminary student or a young clergy of whatever tradition, chaplaincy might be where you get a job. Some employees won't avail themselves of therapy services because of lingering stigma, as well as a fear that they won't get promoted if their supervisors know they're having mental health problems. Talking to a chaplain carries no such weight. The informality can lead people to open up when they otherwise wouldn't. Let's leave it there. We've rolled our eyes a little bit about this in the past, about spiritual consultants in sort of corporate America, and yet there wouldn't be a need for it if people weren't needing it. So, and if work really has become all of life, as the burnout people say it has, and even your massage is a form of body work, well, then it makes perfect sense that to meet people where they are and to deal with what they're suffering and to bring spiritual perspective or wisdom or maybe even some gospel good news to people, you sort of have to go where they live, and where they live is the office in some regard. What do you think about this, though? I mean, I didn't know that chaplaincies were increasing. I mean, it's a really expanding market here.
I have mixed emotions about it. You know, I think I understand exactly what you're saying, and I'm glad that people are finding some hope and some peace and some comfort, you know, when and where they need it, and in a way that is sort of convenient for them and makes sense. I think what makes me nervous about it are two things. And the first thing is weird because it's something it's strange to hear it come out of my mouth. But, you know, so much of the good work that happens in a place like church, and so much of the healing that people experience, it's a combination of things, right? It's in an ideal situation, it's the melding of a message they're hearing from up front and a love they're experiencing in community. You know, it's the gospel expressed again through things that, like the spoken word is incredibly important, right? Like having a preacher who you feel like empathizes with you and speaks to the reality of the human condition. But then just finding people that you can actually tell the truth to and be open with and have these genuine, non-transactional, non-hierarchical relationships with. And I can say as a minister, as a priest, the idea of being a chaplain scares me because I could never solely shoulder the burden for someone's spiritual well-being. You know, like I want to get to know people and I want them to come see me, but I don't begin to think that that God is going to speak exclusively through me. Like there's so many amazing people in my church that I want them to get to know because I know God's going to speak to them through those people and not just through me. And so it just saddens me to think that someone would miss out on that. Like, because a good church is a really good thing, you know, for so many reasons. And the other thing which makes me nervous about it, I think we've said this before, is just when you have a work-based chaplaincy, how does that not just become another way to enhance and increase your efficacy and your efficiency? You know, how does it, you know, in some ways that good gospel preaching might make you a less effective employee. You know, you might be willing to work a few less hours and go home a little bit earlier.
One can hope.
Right.
Yeah.
But if you're the kind of chaplain who says to somebody, maybe you shouldn't work so hard, or but it sounds like your boss is kind of a jerk, you know, like, it's weird. It's very strange. Like, how does it not become spirituality in the service of capitalism? Like, I'm not exactly sure. So those are some of my hesitancies.
Very wise, very germane, trenchant, excuse me.
Oh, trenchant.
Yes, it's deeply trenchant. Sarah.
I have one main thing to say and then one nice thing to say. The main thing is, I feel like Yale Divinity School could turn out a lot of people who could do this job. Because, I mean, honestly, like,
those who don't know Yale Divinity School, tell us what do you mean by it?
Okay.
Just leave and go work for an investment bank seamlessly.
MDiv, which always sounds real impressive, but it's easier to get in the seminary than it is to get in the undergrad, so don't be too impressed. It wasn't a place where I heard the gospel. It was not a place where I was taught to preach the gospel. It was a place where, I did learn some things academically, but Lord, y'all, I didn't learn to baptize a baby there. I did not learn to do real church Christian things in a lot of ways. I'm be honest. And so I hear this and I think, well, there were, they could train some people to do this job there. And so what kind of also pairs with that, which I guess is also mean, but I don't know how it's judgmental. I don't know how you could actually be a minister of the gospel and do this job in a secular environment for all the reasons RJ pointed out. I just don't think you can because, I am, if anything, I've always said this, but I was the one in seminary who, when people didn't want to go to morning prayer or they didn't want to go to the mandatory dinners and stuff, who did they come to? Me. They came to me every time. They said, Sarah, I don't feel like going. I said, oh, go. It's just fascinating to me. I could never do this job. I could never do this job. I know wonderful people who could do this job. I could not do this job. The nice thing, and maybe nice is the wrong word, but it's totally, RJ really covered this, but it's I think about just our young moms group at church, just in the past 6 months has had a cancer diagnosis.
Yeah.
The death of both my parents, a major, horrible brain diagnosis for somebody else's parent. Today, a baby is being born. All that has happened just with this small group of women. There's probably 25 of us. And that, and we pray for each other and we bring each other meals. And, when my parents died and I had to pull back with interaction, I was like, is this going to die? No, it's not going to die. Cause God is there. And that's the other insight I think that's so important, RJ, is yeah, this sounds like a terrifying job because I would not want to shoulder everyone's burdens and difficulties. And, the thing about a church community is the Holy Spirit shows up and shoulders a lot of that and disseminates it among different people. And, so yeah, I don't know. It's not something I could do.
I hear what both of you are saying. I think you're right. I think if you started to say anything that would contradict the bottom line in some regard, I'd imagine your job would not be would ultimately get cut. And the gospel, which says that that God values you apart from your ability to produce, and fundamentally, or sort of in spite of your inability to produce, in full view of that. And who you really are, not who you are just 9 to 5. That's a very difficult thing to reconcile, and it's basically impossible. Yet I also recognize that, as I said, as people who believe that God is the gospel is not confined to the church, and it's it's true in all instances, that there's some opportunity or some recognition that we are not just machines. We are not just computers. There is something distinctly human about, or spiritual about the human creature. And that very recognition strikes me as an encouraging thing, even if it's addressed in ways that are ultimately, serve mammon, as they say, rather than God. So it's complicated. I'm with you guys though, and that to think that the one person on staff is going to take all of your spiritual burdens on, or that sounds like a recipe for burnout.
That's heavy,
right?
And I cannot figure out why Yale does not call me to come speak there, y'all.
This is, number 28 public denouncement of their school, where
Well, there's like I said, there's one more thing too. There's something about how, the whole term spirituality is it's trying to harness these things, harness these truths in service of our own vision of what we want to be and what we might be, the human project, versus Christianity, the gospel being walking alongside people as they kind of suffer in many different ways, suffer and also enjoy all the things that God is doing in their life. You know, it's not it's giving up on your own vision of what you think your life is supposed to be and just dealing with the reality on the ground.
Yes.
That there's something fundamentally, it's not the word spirituality is so strange. Anyway, sorry, just a thought.
Well, let me.
I saw somebody today put up a meme that was somebody was like, I'm spiritual. And then the response is like, well, demons are spiritual. You're going to need to be more specific.
Yeah, exactly.
Ooh, that's good. That's good.
Exactly.
Well, there's here in Virginia, at least, I know we bypassed some of the talk of what's actually happening in the world, but things are starting to open up and return, and vaccinations, and people are not wearing, there's plenty of stores, places, governors have said, you don't have to wear masks in certain places. More and more people can gather together. It feels like both the return to the way it was and before pre-pandemic, and a lot of, I keep seeing people's like, I haven't seen you in a year and a half. Your kids are like 3 times the size.
Yeah.
But there's also a sense in which we're going into the unknown, as we have been always. But it's like, what is life going to be like after this? I know that's certainly true for church people, but it's true for a lot of, offices. It's true, are people going to work remotely still? What is life going to be like on the other side of this thing? To what extent will it be novel, and to what extent will it be rote? And Sam Bush, our wonderful, basically contributing editor at this point, wrote an incredible piece on Mockingbird called Facing the Strange. Why do we need to experience new things? This is what Sam writes. He says, on the one hand, our society is addicted to novelty. We are mass consumers of the latest gadgets, the trendiest styles, the hottest TV shows, and all the breaking news we can get a hold of. But we are also slaves to the familiar. The Office, a show that ended in 2013, was the most streamed show in 2020 by far. Baby boomers have kept classic oldies radio stations alive and well for the past 40 years. Just last night, Sam writes, I ordered the same thing I always order when I dine at a particular restaurant. Advertisements may temporarily convince us that the new thing will solve our problems, but experience shows that if the shoe fits, we'll never take it off. As one neuroscientist explains, we are built to abhor the uncertainty of newness. Well, in these never-endingly uncertain times, it's no one's fault to stick to the familiar creature comforts. There's so much fear in the world as it is. Who can be blamed for wanting something reliable? Much can be said for the dependable sources of love and comfort in one's life. But Scripture has the unique ability to endlessly repeat itself without becoming something rote. Its waters are not frozen in time, nor are they stagnant, but living. In fact, Scripture is a gift that keeps on giving, not despite, but because of the passage of time. Like Shakespeare or a timeless film, repeated viewings don't wear the text out, but enliven it. The Bible then encourages us to sing to the Lord a new song. The same words have a tendency to strike a different chord again and again. While we might constantly change, the impulse to reach for the familiar, oldie but goodie, is rewarded when one seeks out God. If change is the only constant in life, the same can be said of God. The gospel is where those two constants, the variability of life and God's faithfulness, meet. It is where the constancy of God's character interfaces with the life that is ever-changing, the tangent point where infinity meets the finite of our lives to make all things new. It's beautiful.
I mean, Sam is such a gifted writer. I know we're not here to talk about Sam, but I get excited when I see a piece on the website from him, honestly.
He's in seminary, so he's got a lot to think.
I'm excited for that. I think it's going to be a blessing to the church. I just love this. I think that I'd never thought about, and I hate to use this word, but I also love to use it, sort of the magic of Scripture. And, it's funny, we can, and we are definitely a Harry Potter household. We have all these kind of magic kind of fantasy, things that all involve old books, and there's secret formulas in them and all this kind of stuff. We're in that era with our kids where they're very into that kind of YA literature. And, And there's something about us that craves that really early, that craves a sense of the transcendent, on the page. And I think there's something in us that desires deeply the gospel and belovedness and all those things that are included in those pages, and seeing ourselves and seeing our pain, seeing our burnout, and seeing it redeemed in those pages that starts really early. I mean, honestly, it makes me think about the work that Melina Smith does in Storymakers, and like how like telling children the story is really like what we do, is what is like the whole point, just telling the story, because it is so compelling. And
It's old
RJ,
and
I'm sure
new.
you've
It's
experienced.
old and new.
Yes. Like I'm sure RJ's experienced this. Dave, you preach enough. I'm sure you've experienced it, where you come back to a text that you've preached years ago. And, I don't even preach that often. And like, weirdly, like, I love the story of the woman with the well. And it's been in the lectionary for me like 2 or 3 times to preach. Like, it's so crazy. And you look at it and it's completely different again. I mean, one thing I will say about my life right now is that everything looks different now. Like, books I read look different. Music sounds different. And so, like, it's really interesting to return to scripture and to, almost feel my hands sink into the page.
That's an image. Wow.
It brought to mind a few thoughts from me or stories. Like, one is Jamie and I, when we first got married, she was a pretty new convert to the faith, and she read the Bible a lot, and she prayed a lot, like maybe like hours a night, And then we had a baby, and there just wasn't, she didn't have the time, she didn't have the energy, and I think there's a little bit of guilt associated with that. But at some point she said, RJ, I suddenly realized I'm learning more about God through being a mother than I could have ever learned, not more than through the Bible, but that I'm learning if God loves me 1/100th as much as I love this baby, like, I'm going to be okay. I'm in good hands. And I think, we return to the truths of the Bible because they enlighten what's going on in our lives, right? There are these eternal promises. Our lives are shifting, but the eternal promises remain.
Yes.
And I think they sort of bounce off each other in a certain kind of, that happened in my life too. When I was trying, the period of my life in my early 20s, I was trying really, really hard to live actually by the Sermon on the Mount and to do everything it said, and it wasn't going very well. And like suddenly realized, okay, I need to think not just about what the words are saying to me, but how they're making me feel. And go with the feeling, go with this crushedness that I'm feeling, and it set me up for the gospel. That it wasn't just in my head; it was in my heart. So that was one thought. It also made me think of this woman I knew a while ago who she only ever listened to older music, like from her childhood. And I remember her saying to me at some point, like, RJ, for me the canon was closed in 1990 or whatever it was, and I only listened to music from before then. And I was like, huh. Okay. And then I realized that was like right around the time her mother unexpectedly died.
Yeah.
And she was like in high school, and it was like a part of her life just shut down when that happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was sad.
What's sad is I only listen to Dave Matthews right now for the same reason.
Yeah, exactly. For the rest of your life. For the rest of your life, it'll only be Dave Matthews.
It's me
what a
and
blessing.
marching.
What a blessing.
Charlottesville.
Yeah. And then the last story I'll tell is I remember an older couple that I married once. They were in their 70s or 80s, maybe even. Their first marriage, they'd both gotten in trouble in high school. They'd gotten married because you had to do that back in those days, and it had not gone well. The second marriage for both of them was kind of a disaster. Their third marriage was, for both of them, amazing and long-lasting. But both of those ended in death, like one cancer, and then another one with a long time of Alzheimer's or dementia. And so really hard. And then after that, they were kind of worn out, and they weren't looking for anything. They just were trying to sort of rest. And then they discovered each other and just like totally completely fell head over heels in love with each other. And to see them like, I did premarital counseling for them, which is completely absurd. But to see them sitting on the couch, just like so totally unexpectedly in love, I said to them, it's just the most amazing thing, because it's like God is never, like, just when we think God is done with us, he's not done with us, right? He's always ready to give new, unexpected gifts. And I think that's part of what Sam is trying to say too. God is always standing ready to give us new, unexpected gifts, whether it's through new music or through the Bible or through having a child or falling in love or whatever it might be. Just when we think it's over, it's not over.
That's a great story, to be honest with you. That's a wonderful thing.
I love that.
And that's sort of part of the privilege of non-chaplaincy work, I think you might say. Like,
that's right.
I think of it, so this week I wrote something about feeling increasingly like midlife is a time when you start to feel like a cliche a little bit, like that you're, men have their midlife crises, and or the people who have empty nest syndrome, all these problems that are very predictable but they're still real, and that you almost feel bored talking about them out loud, but they're also things that you suffer. And does God care about how conditioned I am to think that I am loved according to my specialness, even the specialness of my problems? That there's got to be something novel about me or about my sin. And the truth of the gospel, one of the ways that it hits in a new way, is to realize that the cliched problems, the exact things that Hollywood tries not to write about, or that are almost so embarrassing to say out loud, that God still cares about those things, and that there's something actually deeply fresh about that. To say that the places in which you're predictable, that's where God predictably is at work, and I don't know. I think I tried to say something about foresight doesn't inoculate anyone against sorrow. So you can know exactly the problems you're probably going to be having when you're 55. And that doesn't mean that will in any way help you avoid them. But what we do know is we cling to God's faithfulness, and we find afresh in that season, His mercies are new every day, and that we're not turned away according to our novelty or our roteness. And I don't know, that's just where it struck me personally this week. And I think it's important that the cliche that God, the most damaging cliche of all, is that I'm only loved according to my specialness, according to my distinctiveness at work, or that's causing me burnout, or that my spite is somehow going to earn me something if I'm spiteful at the right things in the right way. So I don't know. That's just sort of my personal tangent on it, because I think what Sam is saying is one of the miracles of the Christian faith, is that things wouldn't need to be fresh if we remembered anything. If we remembered the grace of God, then it wouldn't have to be repeated. And so in a sense, it's old and new, because we are always old and new at the same time.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I love that.
Well, that's all I got. We'll be back in a couple weeks, and then I don't know what we haven't thought about summer yet.
We don't know what we're doing this summer, guys.
No, who knows?
We have no clue.
I will be going on vacation. I do know that.
But I mean, same. But in terms of this thing we do, I don't know.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
I will not be recording on vacation. So,
well, on that note, we we hope that you're not burnt out of us.
Not at all.
And
Please, Lord.
happy Pentecost to all of our listeners, and to you and RJ, Sarah and RJ.
Absolutely.
Happy Pentecost.
What a nerdy thing to say.
Let's get lit. Okay.
So churchy. Okay.
All right.
Bye.
Flaming
Bye.
tongues. Okay. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening. Remember, you can find us on the web at www.mbird.com. And we'd always love to hear from you at info@mbird.com. Audio production for the Mocking Cast is provided by TJ Hester. And if you like what you've heard, please drop over to iTunes and leave us a rating or review. Until next time.